So is anyone here a game developer? Okay, well this will apply generally to app development as well, but this is kind of a little bit of a game-focused talk. Don't worry, I'm not going to get into depth about games. Like I'm not going to talk about like game loops, physics. I did, yeah. It's maybe not. Hey everyone. How's it going, man? Glad you're here. Glad you're in the center of the room. You get the best audio of everyone here. You know, others that get more visuals, but best audio over there. Anyways, hey, welcome to Advanced Debugging with Firebase Crashlytics. Have people here heard of Firebase? I assume the answer is yes. Is there anyone here who hasn't? Okay, at least one. Anyone else? Okay, cool. I can now tell my boss that expensing my Amtrak ticket up here was worth it. I've reached a couple more folks. But hey, everyone. My name is Joe Spiro. I'm a developer relations engineer at Firebase. Fun story. Part of the reason I decided to come out here is my first video game related job was actually, so I'm a former game developer. Probably should have said that. But my first video game related job was actually here in Troy. Have any of you heard of First Playable Productions? Technically, they still exist, but it is mostly downsized now. But they were in downtown Troy. Had like this beautiful office back in the day, and that's where I got my first games job. Before that, I had just done purely software engineering. But yeah, at Google, I mainly do a couple different things. So I write tutorials, documentation. I get paid to answer Stack Overflow questions. So if you ever, well, there's a number of us from Firebase who answer Stack Overflow questions, but if you see stuff related to C++ or Unity, it's probably me. I mean, my name will be there, so you'll know, but other than that, I also do an office hours program. So external companies who write in and want to know a little bit more about how to use Firebase, I also handle those requests. Anyways, so people mentioned that they had heard of Firebase. Has anyone here used it? Okay, cool.
I accidentally ended up paying more.
You actually ended up, sorry?
I actually ended up paying because they give you a free tier.
Oh, yeah.
And I ended up paying. So watch out.
Okay, we can talk more about that later, but there are various ways to, you know, see how much you're going to be, see what your usage will look like and whether that's within free, et cetera. But anyways, of those who have used it, you know, what products, just shout them out. What products have you used within?
I just use it for hosting.
Oh, okay, cool.
Authentication.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah. Crashlytics.
Oh, beautiful. Well, then you're going to be very at home in this talk. Anyone else? Okay, cool. So for those who don't know, Firebase is Google's app development platform, which is usable for mobile applications and web. There's a couple other more special case scenarios, such as some embedded devices, some other things, but that's a topic for a different discussion. This is where my script would have come very in handy, but I'm just going to say that I'm going to give you guys a kind of cautionary tale about sort of a software development common story, which is, hey, imagine you start a company with your friends, in this case, a game company. You make a small game, let's say something as small as like Flappy Bird. Wow, that is a dated reference now that I think about it, but thank you for nodding. But you know, at first, things are simple. You know, you make the small game, you're getting some good reviews, you decide to add more features. Let's just say Flappy Bird didn't end the way it did. It instead, you know, got developed out and kind of expanded. And so with your broader scope, you start noticing that you're getting a couple more user reviews that point to different bugs, but you're generally able to recreate the issues and investigate them, figure out what's going on, and either stop crashes, you know, release new patches that like improve efficiency, stop ANRs, things like that. But so as you get even bigger and develop out more features, like let's say you've made a Flappy Bird MMO. I'm just really shooting for the moon here. You know, you have a full-on quest system, like you have guilds, community moderation, all that stuff. So you're getting too many reviews with too cryptic sort of directives about, hey, I don't know how to solve this because someone is doing something I would have never thought to do, or it's not exactly clear what's going on. So it becomes harder to identify, replicate, and fix all the bugs you're seeing. And so you decide to hire a QA team. Have any of you worked QA before? That's awesome. Like shout outs to anyone who's ever worked QA. It is the software development equivalent of being a server where you are the backbone of the society and people don't treat you well. So QA can only find so much though, because you know, when you have such a wide release as this incredibly popular Flappy Bird MMO that I've just invented in my mind, you run into this issue where there's just too many bugs coming in and they can't hit all of it, and frankly they might not even have the right hardware devices or other things like that to match the use conditions that the users are running into these issues with. So it kind of becomes more and more of a challenge. So in this scenario where I've outlined this MMO, let's just say that it was 2D. You know, you got a MapleStory thing going on with your Flappy Bird MMO. Again, totally freestyle in this one because it was not in my notes. But let's just say you've now made it a 3D game, and you know, you're running this on phones, and that's pretty difficult. So you have a more dynamic and complicated game where there's an exponentially growing problem space. And if people here are familiar with sort of QA testing or testing generally, you know that you have a test matrix where you kind of try to check spots of different intersecting conditions in the possibility space of your game or app, depending on what you're developing. But as you grow your possibility space, this becomes harder and harder to do. It becomes exponentially, cascadingly complicated. And you know, you can only linearly hire, in most cases, QA folks, because unless you're making exponential money, in which case, please inform me how you're doing it. I would love to know. And so with this, you kind of get problems where people run into game states that you didn't think were possible. Like certain variables are set together that, like, how could that possibly have happened? And you run into crashes where you don't know what's causing it because, like, you might not have this information from the end user unless they spell it out in a review. But even that will kind of only be a subset of the issues. So, as mentioned earlier, just to add one more nightmare level to this, I was going to ask you how many different versions of Android devices there were, but the answer's up there. So, small clue, it's in the you know, greater than 24,000 distinct Android devices now. And as you can guess, these vary tremendously the world over. In like the US, we're very used to having pretty powerful phones. Even low-end phones here are quite powerful, but if you go to many other markets, the median phone that you'll run into there can have a lot less memory or have like other bottlenecks that you would have never heard of and that frankly you're not going to run into in your testing. And because of that, when you release a wildly world-spanning successful game like Flappy Bird the MMO to other countries, you could run into issues where people get crashes simply because, like, hey, they don't have enough memory and the program starts thrashing while it's loading things in and out of memory and causes like an ANR or like some sort of crash. And so there are these things called test labs. Google has one. Are you guys aware of test labs for mobile devices? Okay, so basically it's places that have a giant selection of mobile devices to test your applications on. And these are great, but once you get to this stage of growth, you run into an issue where like even they don't have everything. For instance, like I don't think Google's test lab is gonna have like the latest Chinese model of like smart TV running Android only in like northern China. Just like good luck. I don't think we're gonna have that, but you know, I could be surprised, but it's often the case we don't. So what's a game developer to do? You know, you're getting a bunch of negative reviews for your system because for some reason your cool MMO doesn't work on a northern Chinese television. That situation you never would have guessed in a million years that you'd have to deal with. So it's also nearly impossible to replicate these bugs because, again, you don't have some sort of more exotic devices. So the question then becomes, what's the solution? You guys can probably figure out what the solution that I'm going to propose is, given that's the point of the talk, but enter Crashlytics. You had mentioned that you would use Crashlytics. Has anyone else here used Crashlytics before? Okay, so we got two folks. Among the many different things Crashlytics can do, it allows you to not only report out crashes and errors from your game/app, but also allows you to get runtime logs, game state as custom keys, and device-specific metadata, so you can kind of better heat map like where in the sea of devices you're running into issues. And you can also get real-time alerts. So for instance, if a repeated bug is happening fast enough, you get emails and other alerts that tell you like, hey, you really need to look into this set of things. Additionally, you get the ability to more easily debug and replicate things and then roll out fixes quickly, with the ability to also track which release candidates and which releases these bugs are coming from. So, I want to say that the talk that I'm giving today is based on a learning pathway I have, which is online that you can find. I would not suggest doing it during this talk. You will not have time. Also, you'd probably have to be running a fairly beefy machine, which unless you're like plugged in right now, it's gonna like lose battery fast. Yeah. Yeah. But at this QR code, you can get some of the information regarding actually doing this. It's all included in one of the first links. But I just figured it'd be nice to spell them out. But that said, the name of the learning pathway, off the top of my head, I think it's Debug Your Game Using Advanced Crashlytics Features, similar to this talk. It uses a version of, has anyone here played the Google Firebase demo game Mecha Hamster? Has anyone here played Super Monkey Ball? It is surprisingly similar, oddly enough. Fun game, but instead of a fun monkey named I, you have a cute hamster whose name I do not know now that I think about it, but I'm just going to assume it's something like I. But we have this game completely open source, both the original version on our GitHub and also the version that I made, which is kind of a cut down version allowing you to re-implement some of the features called Mecha Hamster Level Up with Firebase version. And so going through this, we're going to kind of help you understand. We're going to show you how to understand your game's crashes using advanced Crashlytics features. I think I pretty much just said all this, actually. Oh, also, something that is covered in that pathway, but I will not be talking about today because that's a whole nother section of conversation, is the ability to use Google Analytics with Crashlytics. Has anyone here used Google Analytics? Okay, cool. Yeah, so they definitely play nice together. You do not need Google Analytics to use Crashlytics, but the two of them play very nice together because anytime you like pop a Google Analytics event in a game that is also running, well, game or app that is also running Crashlytics, it records it in like the crashes that come subsequent to that. Also, one other thing that will not be discussed as in depth is Android symbol upload. So one thing that's interesting for Unity, so I think I asked earlier, but I forget if anyone said yes. Has anyone here used Unity to like a great degree? So Unity is mostly the engine itself is built in C++, but the user code is in C#. And when you make a game for mobile, you typically have two scripting backends, which is C# or C++. And if you want your game to run well, you recompile it to C++. The problem with that is that this often leads to making debugging a little bit more difficult when you're just doing things yourself. But with Crashlytics, you're able to emit symbols such that you can get the original C# stack traces from the C++ code and then use that to better understand the issues that you've run into. The one problem is, so on iOS, this happens automatically as part of like the iOS build process. In Android, it is a separate step that you have to do every time you build. I'm just saying that for posterity's sake, because if you don't realize that, you're gonna run into some problems at a later date. Just look into it. It's detailed heavily in this document. Anyways, so when you use Crashlytics, the first thing you gotta do is initialization. It's kind of where most things start. I have a little sample here of how you would do so. I'm not gonna go line by line unless anyone has questions. If you have questions, please feel free to ask. Hey, what's up?
Is this going to be, are we going to be learning C# or C++? Is this specific to this app like that you recorded it?
It's specific in the sense that this is in the source code on the GitHub, but this is generally a good best practice of how you would want to do initialization for Crashlytics libraries and functionality within. And so I'm not going to teach you C# in the sense of like you're not going to come out of this being cool .NET programmers. Cool and .NET, yeah, that's the combination I meant. You're not going to be amazing .NET programmers coming out of this, but you'll get kind of the idea. This is intended, again, as best practice and check out some things to do. One thing I wanted to highlight is this Crashlytics.report uncaught exceptions as fatal. So, you know, everyone here is not like a Unity expert, but I want to just let you in on a dirty little secret about Unity. Unity games can totally not crash, but your user code can crash, which can lead to this very weird situation where you have a game that's just totally running, but you lose any ability to interact with it. And as such, there is a flag that you can enable called report uncaught exceptions as fatal, which, you know, sounds like it might be of minimal use, but really what this allows you to do is track when you have uncaught exceptions like that will cause you to lose any ability to interact with your game and call it as if it was a fatal, because to users it is a fatal. They can no longer play the game. But the reason I bring this up is because many people are afraid of enabling this because they think, oh, this is going to destroy my Google Play Vitals metrics. Are there Android devs out here? Okay, so you're aware of Google Play Vitals and kind of, you know, the issues that can happen if you have like a particularly bad score, right? Okay, okay, so this guy writes perfect code. I don't know if you all know this. But I was going to say, so Google Play Vitals are statistics whereby if you have a system, if you have a program that crashes too often or has too many ANRs and stuff like that, Google will sort of not surface it to as many people. It will sort of probabilistically change the surfacing of it. The issue is that people think that keeping track of their stuff better will lead to them getting surfaced less. This is not true. This statistic is kept separately from that. So that's just some good news I wanted to highlight. So when you are running a program with Crashlytics installed for the first time, you need to, as part of the setup, sort of do a debug exception. You can do a debug error of any sort, but you have to make sure this gets noted in the Crashlytics console ahead of time. I used to give this talk where I would actually show me using the Crashlytics console, but given that I've done enough of this talk with bad Wi-Fi at different places, I've instead just opted for screenshots. So I'll go into that. So as you can see, this is where the debug exception would take place and how it would be displayed in Crashlytics, where if you clicked into it, you would then get another screen showing both the stack trace and some metadata. So from the stack trace, you can see kind of like what's going on. It's going through the event system. Well, it's going through inputs through the event system, and then through the GUI, and then through the hamster states main menu. So one thing I will note is this mentions, hey, what is the Unity version that this was built with? What are the device attributes and the GPU, et cetera? This is very useful. Does anyone notice anything weird about this device? Sorry? Yeah, so this was run on a simulator because I was getting the, this was run on an iOS simulator rather than on iOS itself.
Yeah, that's why I see that there's Apple.main.
Bingo, bingo. So yeah, this sort of debug error just causes like a general exception, but because it was run on a simulator, you get like a little bit weird stuff. But the fact that you can tell that is already a good sign because it means you're able to understand a little bit more about the environment in which this was run. But once you've gotten your test exception, when you build the game out, we have this menu screen. Is anyone here, well, how many people here are old enough to remember like cheat menus in video games? Okay, cool. I thought those had mostly died. Okay, I thought that was just like a thing of the past now, but I'm glad to know. I thought it was just all DLC now. It's just like, well, instead of cheating, I could just pay money and effectively cheat. But so as part of this, I have a number of methods that sort of demonstrate different Crashlytics functionalities, such as just the ability to log non-fatal errors. Wow, that is a bad to read color on this screen, but log strings and then crash, set custom keys and crash, and set logs and keys and then ANR. That is impossible to read. But I'll get into the details of how those work and what analogous situations you would have when like developing a real game. Oh, I forgot to mention earlier, but I'm going to go through this, and then at the end, feel free to ask me questions both about this talk, Unity development with Crashlytics, and then also just Firebase generally. So if you want to save up those questions or start brainstorming those please feel free to start doing so now. So the first case, we're just going to have a test crash. This will just call a method I have called test crash, which wraps some functionality you don't need to see. But when you actually go into it, oh, sorry, I thought that was going to show a little bit more. But similar to the last one, it would show you metadata, stack trace, etc. That one's not as important because I'm kind of getting into further things. So when you have a crash in a game, you often want to know what the user was doing beforehand. And this is analogous to the idea of a user journey. So, kind of like what sort of golden path or not so golden path were they walking along before they ran into this issue? And one of the easiest ways to do this is similar to doing like a pathfinding algorithm, is to sort of reconstruct the path they took using just like little landmarks. And so we have the ability to log non-fatal exceptions. So here we are just throwing a system exception. In a real game, you would probably want to throw something a lot more specific. But from there, it's caught and then sent to crashlytics.log exception. So similar to the uncaught errors that we talked about earlier, you get a stack trace. And yeah, but to talk more about the idea of the user journey with multiple steps, so do you guys remember when you were taking like CS 101 or 110, whatever it's called? What is it called here? Is it 110, 101? It's 1100. Okay, cool. You guys really went with something different there. But the reason I bring it up is you guys remember print line debugging, right? Yeah, everyone remembers print line debugging. I still do it every once in a while when I don't have like something good to actually use. So one thing that's nice about print line debugging is like, you got here with an exclamation point, and you got here with 3 exclamation points, and somehow I got here in another method that you're just not sure it's going to get called. You can do similarly with Crashlytics, and while this is like frowned upon as bad practice when you actually have the system in your hands and like attached to a debugging device, when it's a system in the wild that an end user is using, this is actually still very useful. So here you can see we've sort of structured the Crashlytics logs, let me start pointing to those, such that, here's the first of 2 descriptive strings, and then this one, which will never get called. And then here's another that, wait, actually, yeah, that one will never get called. Okay, and then, great. So it's working now. So basically, when this is run, you'll see the succession of these such that you get the stack trace here, and then you can click over to the section titled Logs, which I should probably point with so you can actually see. And then here. So you get those. So obviously, in this example, it's really easy to tell what happened because like I wrote a completely deterministic, a series of logs. But in the real world, if you had methods just being fired off kind of like from many different dispatchers, from many different threads, this would actually be a lot more useful because it would show you the order in which things happened. Possibly, like you could make some sort of like logical guess as to why they happened in that order. So going forward, you sometimes don't want to know a user journey. You sometimes only want to know the final state of something. Like let's say, as mentioned in some of the examples, you run into this issue where you notice that users who have this specific set of values or perhaps like set of values crash. And you kind of want to know more specifically what that is. We also offer another utility, which is crashlytics.setCustomKey, which allows you to record key value pairs. And in this case, I'm using it to do something a little bit convoluted, which is just that, hey, I record what part of the day something was in. In this case, I'm taking the system.datetime.now.timeofday, and are you guys familiar with the concept of discretizing? So it's taking a continuous input and turning it into a more discrete output. So like, let's just say if I gave you a time of day, which is continuous technically, and I was just like, okay, so what part of the day is that? You could say morning, noon, night. So it's effectively doing that, and this is because when you record these keys, 1, they're going to be recorded as strings, and 2, if you want to be able to search them, you probably want a smaller order of things to be able to search. And so we're recording the time that this occurred at, which will be done in that first call up here. Then I add to the time with this aptly named duration that ensures phase change, and get another part a day and set that, and then crash. So what do you think will be stored in the value for current time? Do you think it will be the first or the second? I heard it. The answer is second. So in this case, I guess you can't really derive that from this, but it only keeps the most recent one. And this is, again, if you just want the most recent state of something, which is, again, useful if you're trying to understand like what happened right before something crashed. Finally, application not responding errors in Android. Have people dealt with these? Yeah, they're kind of notoriously a nightmare to deal with because they often have to do with multi-threaded code, which is especially true in Unity where the main thread and the UI thread are two separate things. So any ANR that happens is technically not happening on the Unity program's main thread, which is the Android program's main thread. It's a convoluted problem. But the reason I bring that up is, so Crashlytics, through the combination of using custom logs and key value pairs, you could end events for like whatever library you're using that could be calling multi-threaded code. Say, most often I see this in mobile ads libraries, which are using ANRs because they take up a lot more memory than people like to think they do. You can use this combination in order to better understand what sections of your code might need to be optimized. So if we take a look here and just kind of go through, what I'm doing is I'm using a stopwatch and timing the execution time of multi-threaded code. But before I enter that, I record the name of the section that we're going to enter. And so what I'm doing right now is I have two forms of recording. I have the log of what section we're about to enter, which keeps sort of a record of like the path through multi-threaded code we're going through. And then I have the key value pairs. And the point of this is that one of those gets recorded after, and one of them is recorded before, such that if something is recorded as having started but does not have a completion time, you know that is the section that you need to optimize because that is probably where the ANR happened. It's a very high oversimplification of what's done here, but from here, this is kind of what the standard ANR view looks like. It's not super helpful. I mean, you obviously get what thread something's happening in and then the stack, but yeah. So again, because I'm leaving a lot of this talk for Q&A/discussion of Firebase and game development generally, I kind of want to just get into some takeaways. So, again, just to remind people, please, if you're using Crashlytics, perform a test exception as part of startup. I cannot stress that enough. The amount of times that I get bug reports where people are like, this didn't work, and I'm like, did you do it the first time properly? And people say no. Yeah, it could be avoided. If you're developing on Android, make sure to upload your symbols for every build, regardless of whether you change code. And Crashlytics logs and Google Analytics events can both be used to sort of breadcrumb user paths. Custom keys can be used to track final state, and you can use Unity-specific metadata to understand sort of like what classes of devices various forms of issues are happening on. Some other things that are kind of beyond the scope of this talk that I just want to quickly shout out. Has anyone here used, I'm going to say this word the way it's canonically pronounced, but it's going to sound goofy, GWIP-ASAN. Has anyone used ASAN? Okay, so ASAN is address sanitizer. It's basically a library that allows you to understand where allocations and memory usages are doing things that are irregular, such as like use after free or invoking like a null pointer while debugging. You cannot release this to sort of user like public code because it slows your system down like crazy. But Google has this cool thing called GWIP-ASAN, which is a lightweight memory sanitizer that instead of looking at your entire stack, actually looks at a tiny fraction of everyone who's using its stack and then sort of reconstructs the information from like sampling hundreds and hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people and can give you a better idea of how your native code is running into issues. And this is especially relevant in Unity where, again, you take C# code, you cross-compile it to C++ code, and then take that and compile it to bytecode. So all sorts of goofy issues can happen that this is one way you can find out more about it. Have you guys used profilers on any projects you guys have made? Okay. So Unity has like a pretty cool profiler. The problem is you cannot include it in end builds. But they have a stripped down version of it called the profiler recorder that you can include in like final user builds. And I have some interesting news to tell you about how you can use this with Crashlytics or like how it default works with Crashlytics. It doesn't. But you can put it in your game and then report that out to Crashlytics custom keys, discretize some of the input. So for instance, it gets all sorts of like memory data, all sorts of like trace data, things like that, and you can record those as different keys and include those in your Crashlytics reports, such as if you have an error or if you have a crash, you'll know what was going on at a system level. Partners that I have implemented this with have noticed like memory leaks that they would not have otherwise caught. They've also noticed like traces for sections that they thought were very safe code that turned out to be invoking a lot of stuff under the hood. And one last thing, there's a concept in Crashlytics of crash-free sessions, which are just a way of measuring whether an individual session had crashes rather than a release, rather than like a period of time. And this is another good metric for understanding things that could possibly cause churn in mobile game end users. So that's just another thing I wanted to note. That one is available in all versions of Crashlytics for Unity after 11.7.0. And that was a while ago now, but I just have it there just because there are definitely still some folks who are building on old versions, and I don't want to get the mail that that was not there. Anyways, that was my talk. Thank you very much for attending, and I'd love to talk with you, answer questions, or do anything else.
I missed the point of the test exception. Was it just to prove that Crashlytics is working?
It's to prove that it's properly configured, and also your system will not, like there's a number of things that will not become available until you've done just something relatively basic. Yeah. Oh, I mean, okay, so if there's anyone else, and then we can come back to you. Does anyone have questions about game development? What's up?
Just because I wasn't familiar with it, but I wanted to learn about it. Yeah, so if I'm a regular full stack JavaScript developer, if I wanted to go into games, like what would that look like?
Ooh, could you narrow your question a little bit?
I'm not sure how. That's what I'm like. I feel like some aspects of the code that you showed, I was able to understand.
For sure.
Got to the interface that showed I don't know, maybe the API. I mean not API, but Apple. Is that an interface within an Android device already?
Oh, no, so the stack trace and the other console stuff that I showed, that is on Firebase's website. So the code samples I showed, that is, Unity side. I guess to give a very quick summary, game development, there's many ways in. I know people have gotten in from all sorts of different directions. Many people coming in from engineering, people coming in from QA, people coming in from writing. And it's just kind of a matter of finding out how. To give a very abbreviated version, if you're in school, if you're not in school, there's another method too, but if you're not in school, find a local game development interest group, like a meetup or some sort of software development club, and go there, talk with folks there, and look up tutorials on Unity, which is the most popular game engine in the world, or Unreal. Actually, avoid Unreal unless you've been developing for a while, but look up Unity or Godot. Godot is G-O-D-O-T. It's technically Godot, but I'm pronouncing all the letters just so it's easier to write. Oh, were you about to correct my French? Oh. Okay, so.
If I'm making heavy use of dependency injection, and I want to be able someday, at my last job, I had history with Crashlytics. I was happy with Crashlytics, but the team imposed Sentinel on us. I don't know how widely known Sentinel is.
I know of Sentinel. I've not personally used it, but I definitely have folks talking about it as a comparison point.
So if I want, just like I would do with my database library or my networking library, if I wanted to hide that behind an interface and inject it, can I do that with Crashlytics? Is that practical, or is it just so integrated with the code that that's not really going to work?
No, you can definitely hide it behind an interface. I guess, yeah, so you could just have a Crashlytics, I'm about to say a terribly named library, but Crashlytics Manager or something like that, or obfuscated Crashlytics Manager. And yeah, no, 100%. It doesn't need to be there. It doesn't need to be there in code macroing or anything like that. So you can totally do that. That said, dependency management for Firebase generally and Crashlytics specifically in Unity is kind of its own beast that I've written some about on our website and like have some tutorials about. It is not terrible. It is definitely something that is doable, but you have to get it right. Getting it right the first time is a little bit annoying because there's like a number of pitfalls, but once you get there, it works fine. It's just getting there, but yeah. I guess, does anyone else have any questions? Hey.
So when it comes to connecting your game to Firebase, is that like through a Unity package or something?
Oh, okay, yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, there's a couple different methods. There are Unity packages, as you've mentioned. I'm personally not, okay, so there are the TGZs that you can bring in using the package manager, and then there are like Unity assets. I would prefer the TGZs for sure. They're a lot cleaner because one problem with Unity and many other game engines is your asset space is like really cluttered. And as you're probably aware, but like when you expand just like assets into your project, it's just like, hey, we've decided to just like arbitrarily make a new folder here that could collide with any number of other things that you've put in here, and like it can lead to a problem. So I typically prefer using Unity's package manager, which, to be fair, is their best practice now, but they have left the legacy functionality just because there's a lot of people who still use it.
So then how would you implement Firebase Crashlytics into other engines?
Oh, into other engines. So we have a C++ SDK as well, and there have been people who have definitely bent that into working in a number of places. So for instance, it works, it's designed to work in Unreal, but you do have to do like a little bit of legwork there. Our assumption is always like, hey, if someone is coming to our game development stuff using C++, they know what they're doing. So we're gonna, I won't say hands off, but I will say that we're like more like, hey, you got this, champ. People use it on Unreal. I think there are some folks who have gotten it working in Godot, but like in just small projects rather than like a general, everyone can use this library. So it's possible, and we could talk a little bit more about that later. It does expect a specific build system that may or may not play well with, like, say if you're using Unreal, which has its own build system, and it's a fun time. But we can talk more about that later. I saw you had another question? Yeah, no worries, man.
Privacy implications. You send a lot of data, or apps will send a lot of data to Crashlytics.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw some of that on the screen, like the use of hardware and maybe things I didn't notice. What are the implications of that in certain jurisdictions that are strict about that? Like the EU, for example. I was trying to write up a user license agreement or a data privacy agreement one time when I was using Crashlytics, and I got scared. I said, I don't know, I'm not a lawyer. I don't want to have to learn everything that's going on in these EU rules. It was almost easier to just take Crashlytics out than worry about all that. And I probably went too far, but what's some of the discussion around that these days?
So I'm going to preface this by, I am also not a lawyer. That is a thing that is not, and that's not to totally push off your question. This is definitely a question we get a lot.
Yeah.
And so I want to say that this is something that, again, I have to preface again, your legal counsel needs to be the one to determine that. That being said, we have a number of documents on our site regarding specific technical properties that can then be sort of like mapped to some of that legislation and some of those regulations. One thing I will have you look into is how anonymized various things are, and like if you'd like, you can definitely write a Firebase support ticket, and a number of folks I know will take a look at that. And again, they are also not lawyers, but they might be able to point you to the exact, if you specifically outline what parts you're worried about, they can definitely look into that more specifically.
But it is something that comes up.
It is something that comes up, and it comes up in other areas even more, and I'll leave that there. Yeah, no worries, no worries. I will say that there are folks in Europe who are currently using Crashlytics, but again, I do not know the full realm of whether that's all good or not.
It seems to me theoretically one could shut it off for certain jurisdictions. Right?
Yes, and then there are also So for instance, with Google Analytics, there's also this, what is it? A consent mode, which is that like, hey, there are many jurisdictions where it's allowed as long as like it is agreed upon manually, and you can turn things off in Google Analytics, for instance, until someone consents. I forget if Crashlytics has that functionality enabled or whether that's even planned, but if it does, that might be something worth looking into. I see a hand.
I guess on that point, can you conceal, like if you have key value pairs, can you conceal the value?
Ooh, okay. It really means, like, how strong of a concealment are you talking about? The answer is, hey, all this data is still on your system. If someone is running, like, you know, an emulator or like a hacked system, they can still extract it even if it's, you know, even if it's encrypted, like, you know, they still might be able to get it eventually. So anything that you would put on there should only be stuff that you don't mind eventually being public. Meanwhile, if you want to keep something like a complete secret, that is definitely something to be done on your server. You can send up information necessary for the reconstruction of those sort of narratives or information to your server, but anything that is explicitly never meant to see the light of day, do not put there. Yeah. So yeah, let me take that real quickly. When you say users in this case, do you mean developers or? Okay. Okay. So again, if it is available on the, I'm coming from you know, having previously been like a C++ developer in games. No matter how deeply you hide something, if it's on a client, people can like rip it apart and like figure it out eventually. And so it's a question of like, hey, how much obfuscation are you comfortable with versus like, hey, just purely doing things on server. And I typically just tend to default to like, hey, if this really, really needs privacy, only do this on the server. And then once you're there, use permissions, use IAM permissions to control who has access to what in particular. Cool. And I think that is time. So thank you very much for attending my talk.